Okay, I think I'm live. Broadcasting out to all of 0 people, I'm pretty sure, if I had to guess. Let's see here. I'll make sure it's working. The widget. Okay, so here's the deal. I watched Don't Worry Darling finally, and switch over to me. Yeah, so here's the deal. I watched Don't Worry Darling finally, and I've been tracking the drama behind it because it's drama. But at the end of the day, it's a really strong premise. It's a really interesting premise. It's kind of a Black Mirror episode kind of a premise. So it's sci-fi, but it's sort of like the what if. I'm into it, and that's really what sold the show, what sold the movie. That's how Olivia Wilde sold this movie and got it made, is this really interesting premise and the sort of like the upstairs downstairs, battle of the sexes kind of stuff, all that stuff. Very interesting, very splashy, very noticeable. But when I watched the movie, it was a 2-hour, I don't know what you would call it. Messy, unfinished, hard to, unanswered. I guess unanswered. Like it was the kind of vague that instead of being like useful and helping the story along, it just felt like unfinished and annoying. Instead of like, I'm a big believer that you don't need to answer every question, and that and most times, especially in stories, in movies, you shouldn't be answering all the questions, because that's really the responsibility of the audience to sort of figure it out and draw their own conclusions. I believe art is very much a conversation between the artist and the person experiencing it, and in between is the interpretation. And so Don't Worry Darling it was vague, and I feel like it was working against itself a lot of times. So today I've decided, let's go ahead and go back to the main shot here. So this is a big chart. This is I can give you the full chart here. So if you look, it says Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. Actually, it says Act 1, Act 2A, Act 2B, Act 3, because my brain sort of thinks it in 4 acts anyway. So I just call Act 2 two things. I've plotted out the movie. And so basically it goes top to bottom, Act 1, top to bottom, Act 2A, top to bottom, Act 2B, top to bottom, Act 3. But I'm also using Dan Harmon's story circle to sort of break the plot a little bit. That's going to be my first thing I'm going to do. And so... yeah, so it's got these over here. It says start 1, start 2, end 2, start 3, end 3, start 4, end 4. Like those things, that's the story circle stuff. And so those are just markers. And so let me show you what the story circle is in case you haven't heard of it. Dan Harmon is the creator of Community and Rick and Morty, and he did the story wheel, or the story circle. So here's sort of a bad example of it. The top chunk of it is sort of features, and then the bottom chunk of it is sort of an interpretation of TV. But the story wheel itself is the same no matter what. So it's very much. Let me pull up so I can actually read it. Yeah. So if you don't know, if you've never seen the story circle, basically he cuts it into 8 chunks, which is very convenient because I've cut obviously this thing into 4 chunks, and so basically just put a cut in half down the middle. So 8 chunks, and it's basically, first chunk is you, a character in zone of comfort. Second chunk is need, but they want something. Third chunk is go, they enter an unfamiliar situation. Fourth chunk is search, adapt to it. The end of 4 is the midpoint usually of the story. Fifth chunk is find, so find what they wanted. Sixth chunk is take, so pay the price for what they took, and that's usually ends in the low point. Going into Act 3, if you pay attention to that. 7 is return, so go back with what they started, and then 8 is change, now capable of change, now that they're capable of change. And so I think Dan Harmon talks about it's the hero's journey. It's just, he sort of just distilled it down. I think he came up with it during, what was it, Channel 101, that film festival he did, where he was getting frustrated with directors not being able to tell a complete and satisfying story because they just don't understand, they haven't had to think it through. And so the story circle, it's just a template. It's just a template for telling sort of a Western style story. And it's very scalable, it's very usable, it's very simple. And that's what I really appreciate about it, is it's simple, it's not unnecessarily complex. There's also Save the Cat, which is the 40 note cards, which is kind of what I did here, but there's like 70 note cards. There's different ways to do it. There's the 7 sequences or whatever. It doesn't really matter how you slice it. The point is you need to be able to tell a satisfying story, and a lot of that is just staying organized, and then, you know, the real work is character motivations and character sort of directions, character understanding. And so, you know, once you get the plot down, so once you get you know, this chart plotted, that's when you need to go back in and work on your character motivations and make sure you understand that the story is through the character. The story is the human experience of what the character is experiencing. Even if the main character is a robot, they're still going to have human affectation, human emotions, and that's really what you want to work towards. So, you know, Don't Worry, Darling is kind of an interesting case because it's kind of bridges the, I guess you could call it soft sci-fi or hard sci-fi. I don't know if I would call it hard sci-fi, but basically it's a sci-fi, it's a premise idea, what if, you know, ... And the spoiler is they're basically plugged into a Second Life type simulation, and the more or less it's basically the wives have been plugged in here, and the men are basically living with these wives in the afternoons and the nights in this like perfect utopian like 1950s era society, and the rest of the time they're leaving and the wives are just left in the machine. That's sort of the tragedy. That's the big spoiler ahead. Yeah, but again, the fun is how we get to there. The fun is like what happens to get to there, and we see it through the eyes of Florence Pugh's character, Alice. Alice being Alice in Wonderland. It's kind of on the nose a little bit, but hey, whatever. I would have probably called her Allie just to distance myself a little bit, but you know, they chose Alice. She's stuck in a wonderland and she doesn't really understand it. So from her point of view, she's the perfect wife, but she's starting to see the cracks in what's going on, and everybody she brings this to either denies it or just doesn't acknowledge it, which is kind of, you know, it's gaslighting. This movie is literally the narrative form of what gaslighting is, and I think that's what's so frustrating about the movie itself is if you've ever been gaslit, if you've ever been with a toxic personality that does this kind of stuff, there is no satisfying conclusion. You don't have a satisfying, oh my God, now I understand. Movies offer that. Unfortunately, this movie, in my opinion, really doesn't. So to their credit, the screenwriter and Olivia Wilde, the director, did a really good job of the experience of being gaslit, because something matters, then it doesn't matter. Something matters, then it doesn't matter. And ultimately nothing matters because there's no context. And that is the experience of being gaslit. But unfortunately, when you're telling a story, you need to, they need to have something to hold on to. Yeah, that's why stories are different than real life typically, because there is some sort of narrative direction things go. Whereas when you're getting gaslit, you're just getting gaslit. And most of the time you don't have that aha moment where everything makes sense, unfortunately. Yeah, so good and bad, you know. I think that's a really interesting experience that they were able to deliver the experience of being gaslit, but at the end of the day, to what end? To an unfinished movie. So this is a 2-hour movie. I think, honestly, just by recutting the movie, just by adjusting some scenes that are already established, this could be a really satisfying 90-minute movie. That's where I'm at. So, yeah, I have nothing to do with the production. I'm just, you know, I'm a screenwriter, and I think this is interesting because I don't think a lot of times people see the process, and so this isn't everybody's process by any means, but this is a way to visually work out how the story is going to go. Have I caveated this thing completely into the ground yet? Anyway, yeah. So let's get into it, and I'll track the Dan Harmon story wheel as I do it. Let me just fire off a quick text because I have a screenwriter buddy who might jump in. Yeah, but if you want to, let me give you a good proper look at this. And this was 2 days in the making, and I didn't think it was going to take that long, but it is what it is. So this is the chart. There's no reason for the colors other than white just means it's not part of the plot. But yeah, it's basically one column is Act 1, one column is Act 2A, one column is Act 2B, one column is Act 3. And so, you know, you start at the top left and you end at the bottom right. And because I didn't have enough space, I sort of jumped side to side. So I went, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4 instead of 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, no big deal. So having said that, let me pull up Dan Harmon's template. I have a text document that I was looking at because I like it that way. Okay. Cool. So yeah, let's go ahead and go through this. First of all, we have top left. We have that's okay. So man, I'm trying to figure out how to explain myself. We're gonna go through the whole plot, and then I'm gonna see if there's any obvious things standing out, and then we'll go from there. You know, this is just general story breaking stuff, or re-breaking technically, because the story's already been written. Yeah, and just for the sake of arguing that I have a resume, I'm a working screenwriter. I've not, you know, broken in by that definition, but I've worked film festivals and script competitions and all sorts of stuff as a reader. I've also worked for agencies and managers as a reader, and I have an MFA in writing, producing television. That doesn't matter, and I think when we go through this, I think you'll understand why that doesn't matter, because story is story. And if you grew up as a Western audience member, if you grew up in the West, if you grew up in the English-speaking world watching movies and TV, I believe you kind of inherently understand this stuff, even if you don't know how to put words to it. And so this chart is literally just a visual representation of how I think this is a simulation of how we feel anyway with stories, even if you don't have the experience or the words to describe what's happening. So let's just jump into it. Again, spoilers, spoilers, all the spoilers. Yeah, here we go. And if you want to go watch Don't Worry Darling, I highly encourage it. But I'm just gonna plow through the entire plot, and then we'll see where we land. Yeah, all right, Act 1, starting. The movie opens with the dinner party, and it's this sort of 1950s vibe. Everybody's beautiful, these couples. I don't think there's any kids around. They're having fun. They're drinking. We meet Allie and Jack, which are the main characters. Florence Pugh is Allie. Jack is the guy from One Direction. I was gonna say One Tree Hill. One Direction. Harry Styles. Yeah, and we meet everybody else. Nick Kroll is there. He's married to Olivia Wilde's character. I don't remember his name, but her name is Bunny. And there's a bunch of other people, so you're sort of going around the room meeting these couples. They're playing sort of like goofy 1950s party games. And there's talk of this guy, Frank. And the thing we know about Frank is the dudes worship him and the women kind of roll their eyes, but he's important, and that's it. That's a thing. I think they go so far as to talk about somebody just got a promotion. Nick Kroll got a promotion, but anyway, that's the dinner party. That's the opening scene. The next scene, they're at night. They're out in the desert in this fancy I guess this is the 60s, because it's like a 63 or a 64 Corvette convertible, and it's Alice and Jack again. And they're drunk and they're laughing and they're driving around and they're doing donuts and they're kicking up dust and they're laughing, and she has to drive and they're making out. It's fun. It's very short. Good times. The next morning, Alice makes breakfast and talks about this impending party that they're going to throw, and that Frank's going to be there, and that's important. And she suggests she's going to make tuna, and he doesn't like tuna. Frank doesn't like tuna, so Jack, Harry Styles' character, shuts that down. Then there's this earthquake, and the way they handle it is, it seems like they're used to this. They just sort of hold stuff. So it's sort of the vibe that they're used to this. I sort of took it as like, this is the Manhattan Project, except, 10 years down the road, where everybody lives in this town working for this super secret project, and they're doing something. And because there's earthquakes, my vibe is they're testing bombs or planes or something, but we'll get into what that is. Yeah, but that was the next morning. They talk about Jack works, as everybody else for the company, working on progressive materials, whatever that is. And that sort of becomes the bit that you don't really understand what the dudes do. They just work on progressive materials at this place called Headquarters. So scene 4. So the blue guy over here. Men off to work, getting in cars. They all have these fancy like jalopy cars that they all sort of coordinatedly get into in the morning. The women are dotedly standing in the driveway saying goodbye to everybody. Alice brings Jack his lunch pail just in the nick of time, and then all the men sort of wave to each other as they drive all in the same direction, which leads us into scene 5, which is purple over here, and that's driving to headquarters, quote unquote. And so it's sort of like down the lane and sort of into the desert, and it's its own street, and it says like caution or toxic or something. And so they're driving to headquarters, and you have this like robot voiceover saying something about now leaving the Victory Project or something. So it's, or now entering. I don't know. Anyway, it's unclear. If you're keeping up with the story wheel, so this is still in the 1 section, which is the U. So this is the character in the zone of comfort. So everything we've seen so far is comfortable, establishing this is the way of life. We don't really know much about anybody, except we know this is the 1960s, and there's a lot of really hot couples, and all the dudes work at this company, and all the women kind of just wave, and then it's implied they go off to do wife duties, which, going into scene 6, this salmon colored card, Alice's routine. So she's listening to Frank's radio hour. So Frank is such a celebrity in this company that we haven't even seen him yet. He would be played by Chris Pine, that he has a radio hour where he plays music or something and also talks. And so we have sort of a montage of Alice cleaning and, all over the house, windows, bathtub, the whole thing. And then the wives get on the trolley and take the trolley into town, I guess. It's unclear where they go. They go to the mall, basically. That's going into scene 7, which is ballet class, which is somehow near the mall because they have to take the trolley to get there. And the wives are chatting because every wife attends the ballet class. And there's a new girl there, and she looks scared, and her name is Violet. And so Shelley, who's the wife of Frank, Shelley's going to be important because Frank is obviously the boss of the whole thing, introduces Violet and says her husband is now working at, for the, whatever it's called, for doing progressive materials, and Violet's going to be here, and so everybody welcomes her. And then Shelley runs the ballet thing, and so they're all doing fancy ballet, and there's this whole rhetoric about how precision and everything, and then Shelley comes and corrects Alice for being bad at ballet. And then next scene, so green, number 8, we see Alice and Bunny, and Bunny is played by Olivia Wilde, again, who's married to Nick Kroll's character. And Bunny is sort of like the perfect housewife, and so they're chatting outside. I think they're having drinks, and Alice mentions that Margaret missed the ballet. So we've heard mention of Margaret a couple times now. It gets sort of hand waved, and then there's mention of Jack's upcoming promotion and the party that Alice and Jack are having to throw, and Bunny's talking about how this is going to be so great for them, because the men are all about getting this promotion and having high status, with Frank for reasons that are still unclear. And the final scene of what I consider sort of the character in zone of comfort moment is this blue card 9 over here, Alice folding laundry. She sees Margaret, who coincidentally lives next door in this little tiny suburb, and Margaret is holding this little toy plane, this little red plane, and it causes a flashback of unknown. I believe it's like an unknown couple. I think I'd have to check, but it's this unknown flashback. It happens for like a second. So I think the vibe is we're getting that Alice has these moments of a flash, but she doesn't know what to do with them. I think that's the vibe. So that's the end of the U character in zone of comfort. Now we're going into 2, need, but they want something else. They want something more. And so this is the purple card 10, Alice cooking. She's cooking her steak. I think we've seen her cook a steak already, but maybe we haven't. But she picks up an egg and she looks at it weird, and she squashes it, and there's no egg inside. It's just a shell. And she realizes that her entire carton of eggs is just empty shells, and she has no idea what to do with that. But before we can really do anything with that, we go into the salmon scene 11. Jack's home from work, and they're this young couple in love, and they're all over each other. And then we have that doing it scene. And for the sake of not getting in trouble with YouTube, I think I just have to describe it like that. But it's that scene. It's the that doing it scene. The fact that happened so early in the story was very confusing to me, because it had been talked about and stuff, but it's neither here nor there. So it's the that doing it scene. Respect. Scene 12, which is yellow. Let me do this, since we're not going to be looking on the far right anytime soon. Oh, by the way, these cards on the left that are blue, these are just things I want to talk about after we've gone through the whole list. That's kind of why they're there. They're just sort of like bits and notions and sort of hallmarks that I want to talk about. Anyway, scene 12, yellow. Alice and Bunny are at the pool, and Alice is humming some unknown song, and she doesn't know what it's from, and she asked the ladies, and they said, maybe it's your kids, and she says, I don't have kids. And then she has this flash to this black and white ballet thing, and it's unclear if those are the women in the ballet or if that's its own ballet, but it's just this little flash, which is going to be a thing that keeps happening. I actually have it up here on the third white and blue card down. It says black and white ballet plus abstract shots. I don't think we've seen any abstract shots yet. Anyway, again, this is the character in the Need Something, I believe. Yeah, They Need Something. Anyway, going to scene 13, which is green, bottom left, Frank's house party. So this is the big house party that the guys have sort of talked about a little bit. Inside, Alice notices there's this big standing table with this subdivision plot. That's their whole subdivision. And then this road that leads to Victory something. And that's where all the men drive to go to headquarters. And so she sort of traces it, but it just kind of goes out into the middle of nowhere. There's also the creepy kids serving drinks and bunny jokes that they're super weird, but they make really great drinks. And then, let's see here. Oh yeah, and then they talk to Violet more because she's the new girl, and they talk about how she honeymooned in Seattle and that she's still kind of out of it. She's still kind of weird, and everybody's like, yeah, it's the jet lag or whatever, which doesn't make any sense, obviously, which is a thing we're supposed to know correctly. I'm not trying to be condescending. But Alice sort of clocks that there's these coincidences, that several people have very similar stories of how they met or blah, 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 that kind of thing. We also see the men talk, and we see the new guy sort of get bullied by the other guys because he's just like too excited. The men are like, be cool, dude. Like, don't embarrass yourself in front of Frank. That was kind of the vibe. And then there's talk of Dr. Collins, which we haven't seen yet, but he's played by Timothy Simons, which if you need a creep in a story, you hire Timothy Simons. He is the freaking Michael Jordan of being a creep. He's so great. That's Dr. Collins. And so the implication is Dr. Collins also built this incredible society that they're living in, that Frank is the sort of president of or whatever. It's really unclear. On purpose. I'm not trying to be mean. That's all on purpose. So now you have Shelley's speech. So 14. So still in the left column, Shelley's speech and Frank's speech. So Shelley starts her speech saying, hey, thank you for coming. And Margaret, we finally see, is this younger black woman. She stands up and she says, we shouldn't be here. And she sort of leaves in a huff, and it derails Shelley's speech. And then Frank jumps up and does this great speech. Don't worry about her. What are we here for? Blah, blah, blah. This is the perfect life. You guys have chosen this incredible lifestyle in the face of mediocrity or whatever. You've chosen this incredible thing, which is very cryptic and doesn't make a lot of sense, and it's very culty in its nature, which the whole thing is. These especially the men seem to be in this cult that is Frank. It's just unclear what that is. And so I think the mystery of what the story is going to be has to be Alice uncovering what this cult is going to be. That's sort of the vibe that I'm getting. Going on to 15, which is the lavender card, left row. Alice finds Margaret. She gets a weird look. Margaret has a weird look, and she's talking about having bad dreams, and her husband is trying to give her pills, and she slaps the hand away. And the husband realizes Alice is watching and sort of closes the curtain, and that's it. So we know something weird's going on with Margaret, and it looks like she's sort of being, controlled or something by her husband. It's unclear, but Alice got a bad vibe, as you do. 16, the salmon card. Jack Jack is in Frank's bedroom trying on his tie, and I didn't realize that was Frank's bedroom initially, but he's trying on Frank's tie, and Alice comes in and goes, what are you doing in here? And he goes, I was just wondering why he chose this tie, because Jack seems to be like a true believer in Frank. That's sort of how I took it. We have another doing it scene that Jack initiates, and in the middle of it, Frank ends up sort of poking his head in, and Alice sees him, and they like make eye contact, and then she doesn't say anything. Yeah. I think it's played for don't get Jack in trouble. I think that's what it's played for. I'm not really sure. Having watched it twice, the subtleties in the eye contact between Florence Pugh and Chris Pine could mean a million things, honestly. The first time I watched it, I thought they were like obsessed with each other, but it does not seem that way. Anyway, 17, yellow, bottom of the left column, shopping. So they're at this mall where it's 1950s style, where there's like a model wearing an outfit, and she says like a catchphrase, and the girls decide whether or not they want to buy it. I've seen it. I've never experienced this in person. I believe that it's a thing. The girls joke about charging it all to their account because they basically have like an expense account or something. And they joke about not having to drive cars and that the men will drive. And Alice actually has a moment where she's like, hey, I actually like to drive cars. And I think Bunny or somebody is like, no, you like when your husband shows you how to drive cars because you're bunnies who are trying to do bunny things. That whole thing. And then so Alice brings up Margaret, how she feels bad for Margaret. Margaret seems like she's in trouble, and Bunny jumps on it and says, no, she's not our friend anymore. She used to be our friend, and now she betrayed us, so she's nothing, blah, 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 and sort of cuts that off. And then we have sort of like a disembodied shot of while Bunny is telling the story of how Margaret took her young son out into the desert, holding this airplane. We see holding the little toy red airplane. And then the son didn't come back. The son got deleted or whatever, you know. I'm saying deleted in exchange for the word you should use, but YouTube will punish me if I say that kind of word. So deleted, son got deleted. And so when Margaret came back, there was no son, but she still had the toy. And then we snap out of it because there's another earthquake and all the women hold their, you know, martini glasses. And Alice sort of brings up the idea of what are the men actually doing? Are they testing weapons? Because it very much reads to me that these women are the wives of like the Manhattan Project guys who were making the bomb, or they were making some sort of, you know, incredible plane or something. And that's why they can't talk about it. So there is sort of a precedent for this kind of thing. And Bunny jumps in and again shuts that down too and says, it's not for us to ask, that kind of thing. And then we have this flash to the black and white ballet. So this is the second time that it appears to be in Alice's head that she's flashed to the black and white ballet. And I can't tell whether or not I remembered if I realized that was a different ballet, but it's sort of, they're doing like pattern, like it's basically like synchronized swimming, except it's ballet. Yeah. So that's the end of 2 for the story wheel. So that was the end of need, but they want something. And so top of Act 2, so that was the end of Act 1, top of Act 2, start of story wheel part 3, which is the go. They need to enter an unfamiliar situation. Or they enter an unfamiliar situation. We have 19 right at the top. Alice wakes up from a nightmare. So it's unclear if she was having the nightmare about the ballet or if time passed. There's very much a reoccurring theme of Alice loses time and it's not clear when, how, or why. And so Alice is up and going right into scene 20, which is salmon color, or purple colored, montage of the mornings, because one of the things about this movie is the repetition. There's a rhythm, there's an order of events. I think I wrote it down somewhere. It's routines. Yes, it's routines. So we have A, men leaving for work, B, Alice doing her cleaning duties, and then C, Alice hopping on the trolley, and all of this is done with Frank radio happening, because again, Frank is this, you know, sort of not well understood cult leader, basically, who not only did he found the town and all the men worship him, but he has his own radio station, and we'll find out he has his own TV program. And it's basically like self-help, or like, it's very much propaganda. So going into 21, the salmon, so Act 2 column, Alice decides to stay on the trolley, which is not normal because all the women already got off. And she decides to stay on. She chats with the trolley driver, who seems a little bit uncomfortable with it. And she's humming this tune again. And this is a reoccurring thing where Alice is humming this tune and she can't place it. And she looks up and she sees this red plane flying through the air, and it's the exact same plane as the toy. What a strange out of world coincidence, but it is what it is. And so she sees the plane, and the plane is smoking, and she sees it go over the hill, and basically the implication is it crashed. And so she freaks out and she stops the trolley guy and it's like, you gotta stop, did you see that? And he's like, I don't know what you're talking about. You need to drive the trolley out there. We need to see what happened. And he says, I don't go this way. And she says, fine, you're pathetic. And she gets out, she starts walking. Coincidentally, where the plane crashed is on the same road that is on the road to headquarters. So it's out in the desert. Again, we don't really know what headquarters is, but apparently the same place the plane went is where now Alice is going to go find this plane, headquarters. Scene 22, the yellow, she's walking the desert. So she's still humming this tune, and it's unclear if she's sort of problem solving or she's just enjoying the tune. But she's getting, more and more tired, more and more hot, and she sees this building on top of the hill. And so the headquarters is this big, like, artificial hill with a road spiraling around it, and then a building on top. And when we saw it the first time, it looked like the cars sort of drove into a tunnel at the bottom. But now that she's looking at it, she's decided she needs to go to the top of it. Going into scene 23, she's on top of it. Again, we're in the middle of search, so they're in an unfamiliar situation. So this is all new information for her. Scene 23, the building on top. She gets there, she's exhausted, she's hot, she's sunburned. And she gets up to the window, there's nobody there, and she puts her hands on the window and there's this red glow, or like a red flash. And then we go to scene 24, Blue. It's totally abstract. We got like an ink blot, we have an eye, we have the black and white ballet that we keep seeing. They're doing patterns now, which is going to be more and more of a thing. There's also this unknown couple. Like it's really unclear who this couple is, but she hears them talking kind of. And then we also have the voiceover of Frank talking about like his great achievement, which I believe is victory, or I forget the phrase, but it's something victory. It's the name of the town is like Victory or something. Anyway, Purple, scene 25, Alice wakes up in bed suddenly. So again, she's lost time. And when she goes outside, Jack's in the kitchen badly cooking, and she's like, what happened? And he's like, well, the trolley must have taken you back. And she's like, no, I left the trolley. And she's like, there was a plane crash, and he makes fun of her because they would have known if there was a plane crash. And he's like, maybe it's a dream. And she's not having it. And then he sort of mutters to her, you love me. And she sort of just instinctively says the most. And so that it's sort of implied that that's a flashback of a memory. But again, things are messy. So that's the end of the go period. And now we're going into search. So adapt to it. So 26, the salmon card, men leaving for work. We've seen this a bunch of times. They get in their cars. They all sort of, as a unit, drive away. Scene 27, Alice washing windows. We've seen her wash windows in her routine over and over again, but this time as she's washing windows, she gets squished against the window. For some reason, the back wall, it squishes her and she almost dies. And then it just stops suddenly and she's fine. And maybe it's a hallucination, but before she can do anything, the phone rings. So she rushes over to scene 28, green, Margaret calling. And Margaret's on the phone and she's like, you saw it too, you went there, they're lying to us, blah, blah, blah. And Alice thinks about it and she goes, you need help, Margaret, or something. She just blows her off. She blows off Margaret and hangs up on her. Scene 29, blue, in the Act 2 column, ballet class. So Alice sees Margaret in the reflection. So they're doing their ballet, and for some reason, Alice is hallucinating herself as Margaret, except then Margaret sort of smashes her face on the glass and shatters the glass, and Alice shrieks and freaks out, and then realizes that that was just a hallucination, she's losing her mind, and she runs away. All the way to 30, purple. Alice runs home, and for some reason she has kept running, and she is now in her backyard with all the clotheslines, with all the clothing on the clotheslines, and she notices Margaret, who's her neighbor, on the roof. I believe I don't remember, I think she's holding the airplane toy, but she has a knife, and she's on the roof, and she looks at Alice, and then she self-deletes and falls off the roof. Again, use your interpretation for what I said. And then men in red jumpsuits show up and carry Alice away, and they carry Margaret away, and Alice is screaming. And so when Jack comes home, 31, the salmon card, Alice tells Jack, and Jack obviously doesn't believe her, obviously. And Alice talks about her guilt for not believing Margaret, that something is obviously going wrong now, and things are bad. And she goes into Jack and she says, what are these people? What is your job, Jack? Like, all the questions, and Jack sort of gets frustrated and mad and yells at her and says, stop thinking this way. You're going to lose this for us, that kind of thing. Which the implication is he's going to get fired if she sort of acts out of line. That's the vibe. Anyway, going to 32, Alice stays up all night and watches Frank's propaganda on their 1950s black and white TV. And she starts hallucinating again that she's drowning. So we have her underwater in her nightie drowning, and when she snaps back to reality, she hits her head on the window and has to close the blinds, and that's that. And so lost time again, possibly. 33, the bottom of Act 2A, green, morning. She's making toast, the men leave, that whole thing, and she's cling filming sandwich materials for, I assume, the party that night. And she's cling filmed a bunch, and then she cling films her own head, and then she almost suffocates, but the last minute rips the cling film off and is fine. That happened. And so she's full on crazy now is the vibe. And that's the end of Act 2A, so that's the midpoint of the story. That's the end of 4, that's the end of search. So she is fully adapted to it now, going into 5, which is find what they wanted. So Act 2B, we're on the downslope now. Dr. Collins' visit, blue Act 2B. Timothy Simon's character comes in, checks her out, takes her blood pressure, talks about how she's probably dealing with exhaustion and that leads to hallucinations and distorted memories, and that she'll be fine, and that he can prescribe pills, and they don't want pills. And she asks about Margaret, and he basically says, patient confidentiality. And she says, but really, and Timothy Simon's character, Dr. Collins, says, well, Margaret was suffering both mentally and physically, and now she's okay, but unfortunately her husband has been fired as a result of her behavior, blah, blah, blah. So that's the threat. That's the looming threat that if, Alice could ruin this for Jack and both of them as a consequence. But while he's doing that, she notices in Dr. Collins' briefcase, there's this security risk file. And so when he gets up to leave, he conveniently leaves his briefcase and she steals the security risk file, only to realize when she opens it, all the information has been redacted. So there's no point in it. Very frustrating. That leads us to scene 35, purple. She runs a bath. And again, we get into these abstract shots, which are the eyeball, the ballet, the whole thing. And then we have this unknown couple again. She snaps out of it. Salmon number 36. Alice almost drowned, and unknown how much time she was in the bathtub. The implication is she was in for a very long time. Jack comes in excited. He has a dress for her for the party that they're going to do tonight, and he tells her, I have great news. I think we should have a baby. And she looks at him funky because we've already established they don't have kids and they basically don't want kids. So she's a little confused. Going into scene 37 under Act 2B, the big party, yellow. Everyone's there. It's this sort of like 1920s, jazz club. I think of the scene from The Mask. That's my touchstone. Everybody's there. It's super fun. And when Alice sits down, she realizes several tables over, Frank and Dr. Collins are staring at her, and it freaks her out. Before she can do anything about it, they have this burlesque dance with this burlesque dancer in a giant martini glass, and it's very exciting. And in the middle of that, there's flashes again, because Alice seems to be... The implication is this is all in Alice's mind, these flashes. I want to talk about that later, but let's just get through the plot first. This black and white ballet, once again. But we also have the mall lady, which is a new thing we haven't seen before. Also, Margaret, who has been deleted, is laying on the ground, deleted. That's new. We also have the phone call from Margaret's point of view, something that Alice couldn't have inherently seen. And then let me see what the last one says. And then the last thing is imagining Margaret in the desert with her son, I believe. That's the final thing. All these things are basically Alice must have hallucinated or invented. So going into 38, which is another salmon card. That's just a weird coincidence that those cards are like that. Again, if you're just watching, there's no rhyme or reason to the colors of the cards. I'm just trying to keep them separate so that they look different, but there are a couple overlaps. Anyway, scene 38, salmon card. Alice wants to leave, but Frank does a big speech. And in the middle of that speech, as Alice is trying to convince Jack she needs to leave because she's freaking out, Frank brings Jack on stage to give him a great promotion and like a ring, and then makes him do this crazy dance. And I read it as this was like the punishment for, I don't know. I don't know. I'm not really sure how to read it because I couldn't tell whether or not Jack was having fun dancing or whether he was being forced to, but he's dancing. Alice takes off. Scene 39, yellow. Alice is in the bathroom freaking out. And she has flashes of this unknown couple it just keeps haunting her. It's unclear as to whether this is real or not. But Bunny shows up. Bunny tries to talk her down, and Alice talks about how she saw Margaret fall. She saw what happened to Margaret. Margaret's not okay. Everybody keeps saying Margaret's okay. Margaret is not okay. She's deleted. And then she mentions that she went to headquarters, and that's when Bunny gets really mean and says, why would you go to headquarters? The one rule we have here is you don't go to headquarters. You're going to ruin this for everyone. And again, so Bunny is becoming a very scary character. And that's the end of Story Wheel 5. So that's the end of Find What They Wanted. Now we're starting into Story Wheel 6. Take, Pay Its Price. Again, this is the Dan Harmon story wheel. I can pop it up real quick if you want to look. So we're in 5 now, going into 6. Neither here nor there. Story wheel is also in the notes, just the written version of it. Anyway, so yeah, scene 40, green, in Act 2B, the morning. Jack is excited about his new job. Not much to say there. That's just a filler scene. I wouldn't even call that a plot scene. It's there. He's excited about his new job and the impending party tonight. Going into scene 41, blue, Jack's party. People are coming in, and it becomes very obvious that Bunny was not invited, and that's because Alice has a beef. And there's this sort of talk of Alice is the one who convinced Frank to show up. Frank is showing up to this. Apparently he doesn't show up to this kind of thing, but he's showing up because Alice talked him into it. Not Jack. That's very important. Frank arrives, and the men worship him because that's the name of the game. Again, this is very much a cult, and Frank is their leader, fearlessly. Scene 42, purple. Frank approaches Alice in the kitchen, and that's crazy because, again, they have no connection to each other, but he sort of sneaks up on her and freaks her out and basically tells her he knows everything that she's been doing, even stuff he couldn't know, and sort of taunts her and kind of makes her really uncomfortable and says, I like it when people push me. You've pushed me like nobody else. I hope you keep pushing. He basically says that. Very cryptic, very unclear, very mean-spirited, very creepy. You know, pair that with the fact that he spied on her doing stuff with her husband, the day before. This is coming off as very, very uncomfortable and unsettling. Going into scene 43, salmon. Alice takes Jack's seat. So they have the big long table. Frank is at the head of one of the seats. Jack is supposed to be at the other one. Alice sits down in Jack's spot so she can have a right down the barrel with Frank. This is happening. This is the I would argue this is the scene that the movie this is the scene of the movie. This is the scene that when this movie was being made, I believe this is the scene that they had envisioned almost immediately. Alice basically runs the show. She runs the table. She points out with the women all their coincidences, how they all have basically the same backstory, how these guys keep trying to deflect, but the women are starting to take notice to the fact that they all have fuzzy memories and they all have the same backstory and like what is going on. It's the first moment of that. Excuse me. And Jack gets really upset, and Frank tells Jack, "Hey, chill out. Keep going, Alice. What do you think?" And she goes, "Frank is doing something to us, and I don't know what it is," basically. And everybody gets upset. And Frank basically says, "Well, I'm sorry you feel that way. That's not the case. I hope you guys don't feel like I'm doing stuff to you because you're safe here, but, you know, is that why you went to headquarters?" So he brings up the fact that she went to headquarters, the one thing you don't do. And then everybody gets even more upset. And Shelley, Frank's wife, gets furious and yells at Alice for why are you trying to ruin this, you petulant child, basically. And everybody leaves in a huff, leaving Alice there. And Frank leaves and asks Jack to come outside to have a conversation. Going into scene 44, Jack comes inside after having talked to Frank, and he's devastated. And so Alice tells Jack that Frank in the kitchen moments earlier admitted to the fact that he knows everything and he saw me do this. And Jack straight up doesn't believe her. And Alice pleads with him, "I don't feel safe. We have to go. Let's just drive through the night. Wherever we go, let's just go." And Jack seems on board. And so this is the real moment of maybe Alice is getting out of this bad situation. That's a real thing. Scene 45, green, Act 2B, in the car. So they get in the car and she's excited. She said she packed snacks in case they have to drive through the night, but who knows how long it's going to take. And Jack won't start the car. And he starts apologizing to her, and she realizes she's been sold out. And so guys in red, the red jumpsuits, drag her out of the car kicking and screaming as Jack is shrieking and crying and apologizing. It's super hard to watch. Scene 46, Alice is shackled to a hospital bed and she's about to endure shock treatment, and she is fighting it tooth and nail, and it's not going out. And she gets shocked, and immediately she flashes into a flash of this unknown couple. And she realizes it's her and it's Jack. It's them as a couple, but something's different. He's got like an American accent instead of a British accent. There's a few things that are different. And you hear Jack talk about how he lost his job, and she says, "It's okay. I'll pick up more shifts. No big deal." So they're a couple, but this is a completely different couple. Going into scene 47, we see basically our reality. We see the reality that we live in today in 2022. And Alice just gets out of surgery. She's an ER surgeon or some sort of doctor at the ER. And so she's in her scrubs. She's on her way home. She was exhausted. Scene 48 in Act 2B, the salmon cart at the bottom. The cold reality of the reality we live in. Alice is home late, and Jack's bitter because he wants attention for unknown reasons. And they both look like a shell of themselves. The version we've seen up until this point, they're like super hot, and in this version, they look like regular, if not worse, looking people. That's on purpose. We'll find out later. So she wants to take a shower, but there's no hot water, so she's just going to have to go to sleep, and Jack doesn't like that because he wants to spend time with her. And you hear voiceover of Frank talking about his victory project, which we know is the name of the town, and so it's very obvious at this point it's some kind of simulation or something. It's something not real. And so she goes to bed, and we know that Jack's going to do this somehow. We don't know how, but he's going to do this. Next thing we see, 49, right at the bottom of Act 2B, yellow. Dr. Collins standing over Alice, satisfied that the shock treatment worked. But she knows something, even if she doesn't know anything, she knows something. And that's the low point. So that's the end of 6. That's the end of... I'm getting spammed. That's okay, though. Nobody else is watching anyway. So that's the end of 6, which is take, pay its price. And we're going into 7 now, which is going to be return. So go back to where they started. So she's literally returning. So this is the low point of the story. This is the end of Act 2B. Can we just delete these? I think we can just delete these. Nice. Great spams, you guys. Solid. Bots, freaking bots. Yeah, anyway, so going into the final act. And honestly, in my opinion, the final act's very solid. And it's very short. I think it's only like 14 or 15 minutes long compared to the like hour and 40 minutes that we've already seen. Anyway, moving on. The final act, I'll go ahead and get rid of myself on this because that's where the chart is. Yeah, so final act, or this is the start of 7, which is back in the world. How did I say that? This is the return to where they started moment. 50, top of Act 3. Alice is back, and she's the perfect wife. She's crushing it now. She's Alice. Bunny is excited that she's back and wants to catch her up on everything that's happened. She's so excited, and she has that flash of that unknown couple that we now know is her other life, her real life, presumably. And Alice and going to 51, Blue, Alice and Bunny are drinking, waiting for the kids to come from the bus stop, and she talks about her fuzzy memory, and she's sort of, I think she's like taking in the weirdness of her surroundings. I think that's the vibe. 52, Purple. 52 and 53, I guess, are one montage. The way I charted them, they're not, but looking at them now, they look like one montage. So it's a montage. It's the routine. It's the toast and eggs, pouring coffee, Jack going out to his car to leave, Alice cleaning, Alice making a steak, which we've seen several times now, Alice doing ballet, and Alice swimming, which the swimming I think might be new, but that's neither here nor there. Going into 54, the salmon card, Jack's back home, and Jack is humming the same song she's been humming this whole time, and she notices it. And she has this flashback of being dragged, and we can presume that that's Alice, the ER doctor, being kidnapped or being dragged somehow, but she's not really sure. Anyway, 55, yellow, far right on Act 3, real Jack's onboarding into the Victory Project. And so we have voiceover basically talking about his stats and him agreeing to stuff as we see him, just the worst version of him with like long hair, starting the process. And we find out that Alice is unconscious and she's chained to his bed or some bed, and he jumps in bed next to her and she's got things over her eyes and he puts things over his eyes and holds her hand and he starts the program. And that's when we have the shot of the abstract shots. And so that means the abstract shots must be this onboarding process to go into the program. It's the eyeball, it's the ink blot, it's the weird ballet patterns, it's the whole thing. And Alice snaps out of it, green, middle of Act 3. Alice remembers everything. Jack tries to, and as soon as Jack figures this out, she accuses him and he comes clean to everything. He's like, hey, this is the perfect life. You had a crappy life. You didn't like it. And she's like, well, it's my life, blah, blah, blah. And then she puts it together. She goes, oh my God, the wives. It's not just me, is it? And he goes, well, you know, it's whatever. I don't know these men, but yeah, it's the wives. And so she's going to go tell them. She's going to go, you know, the jig is up. And he won't let her go. He just cries and holds on to her. And so she grabs the glass and smacks him over the top of the dome and deletes him. And that's the end of segment 7, which is the coming back, the return. And now we're in the final group. So we're in the bottom of Act 3. All things are coming to a head. Change. Now that she's capable of change. Now that Alice is capable of change, which is very exciting. And so let's just jump into it. Blue, 57, intercut with purple, 58. Bunny finds Alice covered in Jack's blood because he has been deleted. And she's freaking out. That intercuts with Frank at his home getting called by Dr. Collins, finding out that Jack has been deleted. And he's getting mad. And we're back to, you know, it's intercut, so we're back to Bunny and them. And Bunny tells her, they're gonna delete you in real life now. Like, you've deleted Jack. He's gone. If you get deleted here, you get deleted everywhere. This is new information to us. And now that he's gone, they're gonna come find you in the real world and they're gonna delete you. And she's like, well, what about you? And she goes, oh no, I live here. This is my thing. In this reality, I have my kids, and so that's why I'm here. And she sort of gives Bunny a weird look. But the point is, you know, if you get deleted, you get deleted. So it's sort of Matrix rules, if that makes sense. Going into 59, Salmon, bottom of Act 3, lower part of Act 3. Alice is outside, and the men see her covered in Jack's blood, and they start freaking out, asking her what's going on. And while that's happening, street lamps start exploding for no reason. People are reacting to it, so it's definitely happening in their environment, but it's unclear. Going into scene 60, montage of Frank doing a speech, the men leaving for work, and the men driving to headquarters, and the voiceover of leaving the Victory Project, the sort of the disembodied voice saying you're now leaving the Victory Project. And I guess the implication is she puts it together. She knows what she has to do. She has to take Jack's car to the headquarters, and that's how you get out of whatever this is. So she's going to do that. So 61, green, bottom of Act 3. She gets in Jack's car. Bunny helps by tackling her husband, Nick Kroll, which, you know, they're the same size, so I buy it. That's just a joke, but he's not a big guy. And so the men start freaking out, start arguing with each other as the women are watching, and they sort of get that look like, hey, maybe I am being awoken to this kind of thing. That's the vibe. 62, the men in red jumpsuits kick all the men out of their cars and take their cars to chase Alice because they can't let Alice get away. And I think Frank, over the intercom or something, even says you can't let her get away. Going into 63, 64, 65, which I wrote as 3 different scenes, but they're basically just the car chase. The car chase through the neighborhood. Alice has a near miss with a garbage truck as she turns down the Victory Lane, headed to headquarters. The Salmon one, 3 abreast. So they end up, you know, doing that drive out in the desert that she's seen the boys do, or we've seen the boys do several times. And there's a car on either side trying to get her to stop. And Dr. Collins is coming in a big black car coming the other way, yelling at those guys. And she does the classic, you know, Scooby-Doo's done it, Speed Racer's done it, you know, we've done it in Mario Kart. She hits the brakes, and all 3 of those cars collide with each other, and everybody gets deleted. Bing, bang, boom, she's fine, and a big fireball next to her. All is good, except 65, yellow. More cars are coming, so there's more dudes in red jumpsuits chasing her in cars, and so she has to keep going. Which takes us to 66. Frank is furious at his house. He's on the phone with Dr. somebody, not Dr. Collins because he's dead. And you see Shelley listening in the background. And she's putting it together. She's starting to figure it out. And Frank turns and Shelley deletes Frank with a big old kitchen knife. And she calls him a stupid man. She says, "You stupid man," which interesting choice of words considering in the context of what he's doing, he's a smart guy. I would call that like hubris, but I guess that's just, I don't know. It's a weird choice of dialogue, in my opinion. You know, I feel like she would have said something very different and very specific to that, like, why have you made me a slave for my life? Anyway, going into 67, Alice is driving up to the mountain where the headquarters is. And she, for some reason, needs to drive up the whole spiral that she's already walked to get to the top of the mountain. The vibe I got when the guys did it was they just drive into the tunnel at the bottom, but it seems like she needs to go all the way up the mountain. She spins out the car because it's a Corvette, bad traction, dirt road, and has to abandon the car and run. And so she's running up the hill, which she has done already before once, so she knows how to do it. She looks down and sees men in red get out of their cars because, again, the Corvette was blocking the path, and they're climbing up the hill too. So now it's a race to the clock moment, beat the clock moment. 68, at the building. She's made it, and she hallucinates Jack putting his arms around her, hugging her because she loves him, because a couple times she said she loves him. 69, Salmon, flashback, Alice and Jack in bed in their perfect life and victory. So she actually has in this moment, I took it as a memory of Jack in this perfect life, and it makes her sad. And then 70, abstract images. So she must have touched the thing and it turned red, and now we're going through the abstract images, which we know is like the portal between the two worlds. And that's the end. Over black, Alice wakes up. We hear her wake up over black. That's the plot. It took a long time. It took 18 minutes to explain. So, or more. Like an hour. Anyway, so that's the plot of the movie. Honestly, if you look at it from the point of view of, let's walk around. If you look at it from the point of view of the Dan Harmon story circle, which is a thing you can do, honestly, I don't have any problems with it. That's sort of why it's separated the way it is, because it kind of fits. You know, we have the you, we have the need, we have the go, we have search, we have find, we have take, we have return, we have change. So as far as like the Western story motifs, the plot is solid. Like, credit to Amy Silberman, I believe is her name. Let me check. Her name is Katie Silberman. Credit to her. She did it. She absolutely, like, I have no complaints with the plot. However, if you stay for the first part, the story is not the plot. The plot is the thing that happens in the story. The story is the character interaction. Let me go back to this. Yeah, so now you can see me. Yeah, story is character. Story is the human experience. So I'm actually not even going to dog the sci-fi elements of it, or the fact that once you start pulling the thread of what this sort of Black Mirror episode basically is, there's just some logical problems that could have used more time to sort of suss out correctly. The plane, for instance, the fact that like the idea of like, is she hallucinating a plane that crashed, or is she manifesting a plane that crashed? There's like mirror gags where she's in the mirror and then the mirror person does something else that happened in the bathtub. I didn't mention that, but there's a bunch of stuff that are just, they're inconsistent. And so is that a glitch in the system? That doesn't really get addressed, or is she God? Like that kind of thing. Not really a problem. Honestly, not a problem, because the story is the story. The story is the person. And so the issue I think we're finding is the plot is airtight. The plot is fantastic. I think it still could shave off about 30 minutes of runtime, but the plot is working, especially the third act. I think the third act plays out really well, and it's paced really well because it's very short. I think it's like 20-ish minutes, whereas the rest of the movie is an hour and 40. However, again, you experience things through character, through their emotions, through their emotionality. And so in this case, we're following Florence Pugh's Alice's character as she's trying to understand what's happening. And so we have like the structure and the premise of the story itself, I think might actually be working against what they're trying to accomplish by telling the story, because it's supposed to be this like grandiose, high budget adventure where this woman is being gaslit by her husband and this sort of cabal of like-minded men doing these terrible things to their wives. Ultimately, they're basically slaves in the Matrix. But because it's from the point of view of Florence Pugh's Alice's character, we only can really know what she knows. There's moments where, again, she has sort of like a leaky memory. That's kind of the vibe that I'm getting, where she sees flashbacks of the unknown couple, which ultimately she finds out to be hers, which is a very nice reveal, a very satisfying reveal. Kind of obvious though, and again, her name is Alice, very on the nose, because Alice in Wonderland. But the issue is, because Alice, by her own admission, has sort of an inconsistent memory and she's kind of losing her mind, it's really hard to track her emotionality, because it's that of someone constantly stumbling backwards. Even when she takes a step forward, makes a choice, we don't really know the consequences of the context of that choice, because every time she finds resistance, they just reset her. They just say, no, this didn't happen, no, this didn't exist, or they just straight up reset her with the shock therapy thing that happens later. which makes sense for the context of the story. But the issue is a satisfying story that does not make it's the experience. I talked about this at the beginning, but the experience of being gaslit is that of broken promises, doubting your own confidence, and sort of experiencing the delusion, even if the delusion is not there. But more importantly, you don't get a satisfying ending. You don't get the aha moment. You don't finally find the key, the essential key that makes everything make sense. That's the point of gaslighting. And so to have an entire story based on being gaslit is just abject struggle with no satisfying explanation, no satisfying ending. I guess the satisfying ending is she got out, but that's not a story. That's just not being gaslit anymore. And so that's what's so frustrating about this, is there's all these really interesting elements, but because the sci-fi elements and the sort of the premise work against Florence Pugh's character's mission, Alice's mission to solve the mystery. It's basically a thriller. She's a detective. It's a detective thriller. She's trying to solve the mystery of what is this place and why are things not quite right. But in doing so, because everybody, the story itself especially, but even the main character, all the other main characters in the story are actively working against her, there's no clear understanding, even when things are explained, what is real and what is fake. And half of that is there's just some real sloppy sci-fi stuff going on, just that don't make sense, because again, she could be God for all we know. And the other thing is, it's a story about being deceived. So given that, I want to talk about some stuff. Let's talk about these cards real quick. Let's go here. Routines. So one of the great hallmarks of the show is all the routines, especially the morning routines of the guys leaving and the women cooking and Alice doing cleaning, all that kind of stuff, the ballet. This movie very much is about the routines. I like that. We also have Alice's flashback of unknown couples. The big reveal is it's her. And so that's a big through line. Is one of the big mysteries is how she figures out who this unknown couple is. And the answer is she finally gets shock treatment and she figures out herself. So I'm not sure that actually gets satisfied. We also have the black and white ballet and all the abstract shots, which ultimately gets explained to be the onboarding process, but she understands it as something abstract, something weird, and she's not convinced anybody else thinks that. That's the whole issue that we're dealing with, is her information versus everybody else's information. There's no consistency, and because even though we sort of have the eye of God a couple times where we see stuff that she couldn't inherently see, it's not significant or consistent enough to really understand what's happening. I think of the movie The Cabin in the Woods as a good example of the characters not understanding what's happening, but the audience having an increasingly clear vision of what's happening. And so by the time the audience needs to find out what's happening, the characters have like 3 more steps. In this, the audience and the main character, Florence Pugh's character, Alice, basically find out at the same time. And I think that's what's actually breaking the story a little bit. The big question of what the men do, for sure. That's one of her things she needs to figure out, in addition to who this unknown couple she keeps seeing is. And again, I think the meat of this story, I think what this story is actually about is Alice's sort of detective investigation of what's going on, because even though there are other characters in the story that do push up against sort of the status quo that is this story, she's the one taking action, and unfortunately what happens is every action she takes, she gets catastrophically undermined, and we find out later it's for the good of what they're doing. The good being relative, because obviously it's absolutely catastrophic, but you get that whole thing. The other thing that sort of goes along with the unknown couple flashback, but we don't know that they're connected, is humming the tune. And so I think what could happen to make this work is these are connected. And so maybe when she finds out about the fact that the unknown couple is her, maybe she hears the music too and goes, oh my God, that's the music you played for me. So actually I want to put those together. Let's see if they'll stick. I don't know if they will. Let's see here. Alice's descent into madness. Yeah, this is what's killing us, I think. This is what's killing this movie, because if there is nothing to hold on to, there's nothing to hold on to. And so unfortunately, the only person Alice can trust is herself, but because of how she's set up, she keeps getting reset. She keeps getting turned around. She can't even trust herself. And so this might actually be the real problem of the story that needs to be solved literally. And then we have the Men in Red, and having seen the movie, obviously the Men in Red are just a computer program like Agent Smith. That's the whole thing. So I don't really have a real problem with them, other than the fact that nobody seems to acknowledge they exist. I think in this story, they should have acknowledged the Men in Red exist, and the women should be very, very much reactive to the fact that the Men in Red are there. That's what I think. Let's see if there's anything else I want to talk about here. Alice is okay. So yeah, this goes back to the sci-fi of it all. So it's actually not necessarily worth dealing with, but is Alice controlling reality? Is Alice the one who's making the airplane, who's making the streetlights explode, or is this a glitch in the system? And furthermore, the hallucinations, because we know the hallucinations by the end are Alice's sort of latent memories coming to life, but because we have two separate things that look similar, the reality that evolves versus Alice hallucinating in real time, they seem to be muddled, they seem to be mixed. And so I think the move, honestly, is just, for my money, I would just get rid of the glitches or the Alice being God stuff. She didn't see a plane. I would cut it as she didn't see the plane, because the plane is too much. It's supposed to, by design, it's supposed to look like the plane that Margaret had, her son had, but she didn't see the plane. So there needs to be proof somehow that Alice discovers that she never saw the plane. That's how I think you fix that. And then you just get rid of the street lamps, because of the street lamps and the inconsistent mirrors, and there's actually a mirror in a hallway one time where Alice is talking where you can see the cameraman, so they forgot to fix the comp. That's neither here nor there. That's just continuity error. Yeah, but the fact that there's glitches and hallucinations, I think, is a problem. So yeah, okay. So that's one thing. And then the other big question is, who is the villain of this story? And it's set up that Frank is the villain of this story because he is the big bad. He is the person all the men worship. This is the villain card. He's the person all the men worship, but he's sort of waiting in the wings. He taunts Alice a couple times. There's a pretty epic scene. Let's see here. The big party. Nope. Yeah, right here, scene 42. Frank approaches Alice in the kitchen, and he taunts her for knowing. So he really does have all the cards. He really does know everything. But nothing comes of that. He doesn't really interact with her again. He sort of just spies on her a couple times, which is an interesting character choice, because that sort of implies that the whole reason, assuming Frank and Dr. whatever his name is, Collins, invented this reality, is that Frank likes to spy on people. That's his favorite thing to do. He's demonstrated it when they're getting down and dirty in his bedroom, but he just knows stuff that Alice couldn't know. And so that's an interesting character, but he's so underdeveloped because we just don't spend much time with him. And more importantly, when it comes to Alice actually running, when it comes to Alice actually trying to get away, he's not there. He's on the phone, which is a great comeuppance because his wife finally gets the comeuppance on him, but to what end? If he's the great villain of the story, then why is he not participating in the story itself? Secondly, you could say the villain is the other men, because once Alice figures out that all the women are trapped in here, yes, it's very much a situation where the men have created this absolute dystopia where they get to do whatever they want and the women are vegetables. It's the Matrix. So by that logic, everybody is the enemy. But again, this makes a situation where, well, who is her friend? Well, again, we talk about how I've already forgotten her name. Not Violet. Bunny. We talk about how Bunny was Alice's friend, but as soon as Alice starts pushing back, Bunny pushes back and becomes an enemy. And so in that regard, Bunny is another enemy, even though near the end, Bunny does go ahead and protect Alice and say, hey, you got to get out of here because things are going down. But, kind of too little too late. If anything, Bunny becomes, I don't like this word, but an exposition dump. She becomes an explanation of the fact that, here's details that we couldn't figure out a way to explain otherwise, and so I'm gonna have to say it because my character would say it, kind of thing, which is fair, but also convenient for convenience sake. And so I think the move here, honestly, is getting Alice to be the main character of the story. Maybe either abandoning the, let me cut back here, either abandoning the whole, like every so often we see the vision of God where we see everything, we see stuff Alice couldn't see, abandoning that altogether, or keeping it, but becoming much more closer and having Alice to hold on to something. So, for instance, Alice goes to the top of the whatever it's called. I wish I remembered words better than I did. The home base. I forget what it's called. Anyway, Alice went there, and so maybe once that gets revealed to everybody else, maybe the women can be like, "What was it like?" Just giving her somebody to, to understand what she's going through, to sort of empathize with her, to see her point of view, because every single scene, Alice is at odds with every single person in the story, which means when she's actually right about something, there's no way to prove it because everybody else has their own agenda to undermine it. It's just messy. And so they sort of started with that because they started with Margaret basically telling the truth of everything and everybody being unwilling to hear it. And then Alice's big journey, it's sort of between Act 1 and 2, is realizing that Margaret was right about everything and how now she has to go about to sort of rectify the fact that she didn't trust Margaret. I think that's a very strong through line. That's a very emotionally driven story. I like that very much. Unfortunately, once Margaret is gone, she's gone. And there's no, I think the move is investigating what happened to Margaret, figuring out these men in red jumpsuits, figuring out Margaret, figuring out what happened to her husband. Maybe her husband breaks back in. Obviously, we don't have that. And so as far as editing, I don't know what you could do about that, bringing her husband back. But I think the Margaret storyline is the most true storyline to what's going on. And so as much as I appreciate the sort of the rhythm and the back and forth of every day is the same, the cooking, the leaving for work, the women doing just sort of like mindless stuff during the day because that's what they're here to do, while Frank spies on them, we learn later. I think the move is Alice needs to be actively figuring out the Margaret situation. Not just getting off the trolley. That was a really good move, getting off the trolley. But she didn't get off the trolley because of Margaret. She got off the trolley because she saw a plane. Now that I say it out loud, maybe the plane just needs to go away altogether, because the plane seems like a double down, because she was already going to go check that place out because Margaret went. So if she was motivated by finding what happened to Margaret, she would retrace what Margaret did, which was go out there. You don't need a plane, and you definitely don't need the plane that Margaret had in her hands to be the plane to take Alice out there. So maybe that's a double dipping. So maybe just get rid of the plane altogether. Yeah. Okay. Actually, I'm really happy with that idea. So, okay. So let's do some adjustments here. Let's go with that. So dinner party's good. The next morning, talking about the thing, and basically the beginning and the end I don't actually have a problem with, because it's setting everything up and then it's paying everything off. And so I actually really have a lot of respect for the symmetry of, let me go back to the main chart here. I don't have a real problem with the symmetry of, establishing the world, establishing the roles, establishing the women doing the women's stuff and the men doing the men's stuff, and Alice's routine and Alice and Bunny's friendship and the new girl, all that kind of stuff. Whereas the payoffs are abandoning the routine. Alice is now the perfect wife instead of the flawed wife, and go, undermining everything that was established in the beginning. I like that a lot. The weird glitches I really don't like. So we have empty eggs, interesting visual, incredibly distracting, never gets paid off, never gets explained upon. The doing it scene, don't care. That's fine. Who cares? Humming the unknown song. Yes, absolutely. So we're gonna keep the song. We're gonna keep the couple. Let's see here. Margaret, the interpreter. The speech. Don't really care for the speech, but because Margaret interrupted it, I like that. I like that a lot. Trying on Frank's tie, that's an interesting character choice there because Jack wants to be Frank. That's really great. The shopping stuff, again, that honestly could just be up here, but who cares? It's not really all that important, other than it's just adding more information. I guess we need to keep the Bunny is mean stuff, so let's keep that stuff, but the shopping stuff, honestly, it's not that great. And then the questioning what the men do, absolutely, 100%. Let's keep going. Alice waking up. For the sake of what we're doing, the fact that Alice loses time, let me write that down. Alice's lost time is one of those things that absolutely muddles the story. So let me make a naughty list. And I'm going to put it on the top of this. But one of those is Alice losing time in all the hallucinations. But the other thing is all of the crazy glitches and crazy bugs. That's definitely a problem. Okay. I realize I'm losing my voice because I'm shouting. So here's the naughty list. The villain. Yeah, well, the villain will be solved based on stuff. So is Alice changing reality, or is it just glitches? Definitely naughty list. Let's do this. There we go. There's the real naughty list. Let's throw that away. So, is Alice changing reality, or is it just hallucinations? Absolutely. That's naughty. The fact that Alice is losing time, yeah, that's absolutely a problem. Alice's descent into madness, yeah, that's going to be the big push and pull. But I think for the sake of what we're doing, everybody needs to be telling her that she's descending into madness, but she cannot be herself descending into madness. What else? Tune, routines, the men in red. Yeah, that's a keeper. So what do we lose? The fake eggs, which is the glitches again. So that's glitches. I'm running out of pen here. Let's keep going. So let's do nice list. How about that? Is that condescending enough? Cool. Nice list. Routines, yes. Unknown couple flashback, absolutely. Also humming the tune. Make those together. The black and white ballet and the abstract shots we know as onboarding for the game. What the men do. Yeah, that's sort of a throwaway joke. But it is part of Alice's investigation. So Alice's investigation is what's happening. What the men do. And then why memories. And that's going to be the plot that she follows. And then the men in red again are just part of the what the men do. So we'll put that with the / men in red. Okay, so let's keep going here. Shopping, yeah, cool. Wakes up from nightmares. Again, this is going to be the memories. That's going to be a big through line. Alice decides to stay on the trolley. Yes, very good. Except we need to get rid of the plane and just have it where her name is. I got to get my names better. Starts with an M, right? Margaret, where Margaret went. Okay. So no plane. So let's just get rid of the glitches. We'll call this plane glitch. and mirror glitches. Because we're like 3 layers deep into Alice losing her mind. I think having glitches in the program makes it even more confusing. Let's see, walking the desert, yeah, that's fine. Building on top, absolutely. The abstract stuff, that's the onboarding stuff. Jack in the kitchen, basically gaslighting her. For the sake of what we're doing, sure, but she doesn't need to do the plane crash. We just, it's gonna be she went to the thing. So went whatever the place is called, base camp or whatever. Headquarters. Repetition, men leaving for work, Alice washing windows, and the hallucination. Again, we don't need this. This is a glitch. Let's just get rid of all of this. Keep this because we want this. Margaret's call, definitely, that's a keep. Ballet class, the hallucination. Again, we don't need that. It's not helping anything. It would make sense if it was a memory, but because we have memories, hallucinations, and glitches in the program, we have 3 competing things that are basically doing the same thing. Alice tells Jack about what she did. He doesn't believe her, and then he tells her all that stuff. That's for sure a keeper because that's what this story is actually about. She almost suffocates with the cling film. Again, that's her descent into madness. We don't need that. Was somebody supposed to come help her? I don't understand why that was there. That's fine. Frank radio. Let's see. Let me keep going. Okay, so Dr. Collins' visit. Yeah, this is the gaslighting stuff. Sure. For the sake of what we're doing, I guess that's fine. You know, it's not necessarily helpful, but it's basically telling what we already know, which is that everybody thinks she's crazy. So fine. The files redacted in the briefcase. That's fine. I don't have a problem with that. Runs a bath. Abstract shots. That's the memory again. Let me get a marker. Oh, do I have enough mic to... Let's see, almost drowned. Again, this is her losing her mind, and so that's working against what we're trying to do. I understand the logic now is that Alice is having like psychotic episodes because of what they did to her, but for what we're doing, it doesn't help, and she keeps losing time as a result. Let's see, which is right here, lost time. Naughty list. Let's see here. The big party. Sure, no problem with the big party. She wants to leave. Absolutely, she feels uncomfortable. Flashes of the couple that's going to be her and her husband. Sure, Bunny's here. All that Margaret stuff. That makes sense. Again, she's pulling on the thread. She says, "I believe Margaret now. I feel bad that I didn't." I buy that. Bunny bites back. Absolutely. Jack excited about his new job. That's neither here nor there. That's fine. Jack's party. Bunny's not invited. Frank's arrived. Yeah, absolutely, because Frank is going to be the one where she's going to get all the answers to. 4 answers. Wow, the tip of this thing is very sharp. Okay. Frank approaches her in the kitchen and threatens her, basically. For the sake of what they're doing, yeah, absolutely. You know, unfortunately, this doesn't ever get paid off, so I wish there's a payoff later. Okay. She takes Jack's seat, and this is the basically the best scene in the whole movie by far, because she's actually taking choices and making action, and it's right with conflict because it's so full of just her fighting Frank. I'm into that. Jack's devastated, sure, whatever. Pleads needs to go. He says yes. This is a weird thing. I don't have a problem with it because they were already going this way, but it's really weird when a character asks something of someone or is about to do something, and then it happens in the same scene. Usually you want to cut away because you want to be able to tease that and then go to the next scene where it either goes to something else or it gets paid off later. So the idea that he agrees in the same scene is kind of, I don't know if I agree with that, but that's fine. For what they're doing, sure. She gets taken away, of course, and then this is where everything becomes real. Honestly, I don't think we need to see her real life, because the pursuit is her learning stuff, and unfortunately, all this stuff that happens in our present, in our world, is stuff that she forgets when she's back. And so, honestly, shock treatment. Yes. Alice and Jack. The Alice and Jack payoff, I think, needs to happen, but because it happens ahead of her mind getting erased, I think the Alice and Jack thing needs to be its own thing. So, let's see here. Fuzzy memory, where does she figure it out? So this is the Alice and Jack. So this needs to be the unknown couple. Because that's when she figures everything out. And so this stuff, this Alice and Jack stuff, the shock treatment stuff I understand, but first of all, why would you, I don't know. The logic of this whole doesn't make sense, but I'll leave the shock treatment stuff in because sure, but the fact that she figures all of it out in that moment and then immediately forgets it, that starts us over. So I think, again, we need to get rid of all the present stuff, even though it's fun, it's a really fun world, and actually could really well be like a post-credits story, like to see what happened to her afterwards. And so it could be right here, maybe, you know, put the end before it, and that's your thing. I like that as a post-credits thing. The Dr. Collins standing over Alice, I buy that because, again, we don't know anything. The cold reality, again, we just need to, if we're going to do it, it needs to be this last thing again. So we'll just close pin it. How about that? Okay, and then the final act I'm actually okay with, because the final act doesn't really have any context for the middle part. It really only affects the beginning. So Alice is back, she's the perfect wife, Bunny excited, flash of other life, which we know means her other life, but she thinks is the unknown people. Which we could pay off in a minute. Fuzzy memory, again, we know this is the thing. The montage of everybody going about their thing, that actually references the beginning where there's a montage there. Jack's back home humming the unknown tune, and that's when she recognizes it, and that's the flash of being dragged, so she's starting to remember. So, and in a couple scenes, she is going to fully remember. Jack's onboarding into the Victory Project. Again, we don't need this. We could keep those abstract shots as something coming back into reality if we need to, but honestly, for what they're doing, I'm not even convinced they're necessary. We could put the abstract shots down here, though, so we'll just add abstract shots. But again, this is stuff that doesn't, like, because it's after the story, I put it there because it doesn't affect the plot, because it doesn't actually change anything, and it especially doesn't affect the emotional narrative, which is what we need to be tracking. So anyway, so she starts to remember, and then she remembers everything because he plays the music, and that's when she remembers, and she figures it out, and Jack comes clean. She says the wives, and he goes, I don't know, but probably, and then he won't let go, and then she deletes him. Into it, very into it. And then we have the intercut with Bunny finding him and Dr. Collins calling Frank. I'm fine with that. The guy's freaking out outside. We don't need the streetlights exploding because it's just confusing. And visually it's cool, but again, is Alice God? Is she God? And the answer is it's on the naughty list, so let's not do that. This is a memory. The fact that we had this whole montage, I don't understand. I feel like we just know where she's going to go, or she could just drive by and see the sign and realize she has to go. See sign for headquarters. and know that's where she has to go. Or Bunny could just tell her. I think Bunny kind of did anyway, so sure. She gets in Jack's car. The wives are starting to snap out of it. I'm into that. The men in red jumpsuits chase her. That's fine. Car chase, I'm into it. A very silly but very functional car chase. I have no problem with that. Shelley figuring out Frank. He dies without ever having to interact with her. But sure, for the sake of what we're doing, that's fine. He seems like a non-enemy anyway, because the real enemy is the men. And that's fine. Alice spinning out and getting stuck. I'm into that. Gets to the building. Flashback of her perfect life and victory. Sure, I mean, kind of. And then the abstract images fading. I'm into that. So basically, everything we took out were things where Alice is God or there's a glitch in the system. I'm considering those the same thing. We took out any hallucinations. Well, did we though? I won't say that. Yeah, you know what we did? Except for the drowning thing. Did I get rid of the drowning thing? Runs a bath, memory. Yeah, almost drowns. Okay, so let's get rid of the hallucinations and the almost drowning and all that kind of stuff, because the reality is we have the glass, her getting pressed up against the glass. Let me see. Delete female propaganda. Alice guilt for not believing Margaret. Big party, freaks out in the bathroom. I don't know where the glass thing went, but I might have thrown it away too. It's back. No, it's got to be early on, right? It's before the phone call, so it's over here. Squish in the window. So I got rid of that. So we got rid of all the hallucinations, other than the memories. I think that's important. We got rid of all of Alice being God or there's a glitch in the Matrix. I think that's important. We got rid of. That's a glitch. Let's see here. The extra explanation I don't actually care about, but that's fine. We got rid of her trying to delete herself with cellophane because that is completely against character of what she's trying to do. She's trying to find the answer. She's not trying to self-delete. Let's see. Out of the bathroom, we got that. And then just all the present day stuff. And so short of that, we lost 1, 2, 3, 4, call it 6 cards if you put those after the show ends, after the movie ends. So 6 with an average of 3 minutes is 18 minutes. There's 20 minutes. There's your hour and a half movie. Hour and 40 minutes, honestly. And it makes sense because now all of a sudden everything that's happening to Alice is motivated by her character's story, her character's emotional motivation. Let me make sure I'm on this. Yeah, it's motivated by her character's motivation to find out the mystery because Alice is an investigator. She's trying to solve the riddle, solve the puzzle. She's the private eye, she's the gumshoe in this strange world that she has been placed in. And by doing that, she goes from happy life, happy wife, or however you say that, to something is not right because what's her name is being weird and Alice is having these weird memories that she doesn't know are memories. Sure. And then things continue to get weird. And then once we go into 3, which is, let's look at what 3 is. Let's look at the story wheel real quick. 3 is, oh, it's too small. On a roll, Matt, come on. Go. So 3 is enter an unfamiliar situation. Let me put this over here. So we went from character and zone of comfort to need, they need something, to go, which is enter an unfamiliar situation. Search is adapt to it. So this is where the real investigation takes place, which is, again, it's Margaret telling her they're lying and her seeing Margaret self-delete and then feeling horrible about the fact that she didn't believe Margaret now that things are big, now that things matter. And Jack, being Jack, still gaslights her and says nothing's wrong. But Alice stays up and watches the propaganda, hallucinates drowning. Actually, I don't even know if we need that, being totally honest. And then things get bad. So 5 is fine. So find what they wanted, which is, she found the answer, which is everybody is back to normal. Everybody is the normal thing. But she still has the abstraction. She has this unknown couple, which she finds out to be a memory later on. She has the fact that none of the doctors, none of the men are going to help her. She finds that. The big party is where she finds that the men are staring at her, so she's on to something, so she has to figure it out. She wants to leave, which, sure, that's fair. And then she freaks out and tells Bunny everything. So I guess Find could use one more beat, honestly. So let's add a beat to Find, which is Bunny doesn't believe her, but she needs to see something. So she needs to find something, see something irrefutable. It's going to be refuted because that's what everybody's doing to her, but she needs to find something at the party that is irrefutable. So we do need to add a scene. We need to add 3 minutes, so we're back to 15 minutes instead of 18 minutes out. Anyway, 6, which is the pay the price for taking it. So Jack's excited because things are going well. The party, she's decided she's going to confront the dudes, and specifically Frank. She's the head of the Frank corners her at the kitchen. She's the head of the table and she tries to corner Frank and it goes badly. That's how you pay the price. Jack's devastated. That's the extra price because now he's thinking she's actually going to ruin their lives. And then the big price is Jack has sold her out. He's turning her in and she begs and pleads and she'll be a good person. It's not going to matter. That's the price she's paying. Ignoring all the future stuff, all the present day stuff, I guess not future, just different reality stuff. The last price paid, and this actually could be the start of Act 3, so wherever you want to put this, either the end of Act 2 low point or the start of Act 3, is Dr. Collins standing over her, having done the shock treatment. She's good again. Which brings us into 7, which is Return, the Dan Harmon Return part. So I can show you that again. So we're up to bullet point 7 on here, the Return. Go back from where they started. So they literally do that, which I have so much respect for the writing of this because they did it. They just didn't. It seems like in the movie themselves, in the directing themselves, they forgot that you need to track the emotionality of the character, not just the plot, because the plot is pretty awesome. So here's the return. Alice is back. She's literally returned, and she's perfect. Bunny's excited, all that kind of stuff. She admits she has a fuzzy memory, which we know is a consequence of the shock treatment, and strongly implied that she might know that too. We have the morning montage, which is the same as the beginning, which is so great. I love it when that happens. Jack humming the unknown song. This is the last mystery that Alice needs to solve because it's happened in every single act that somebody, usually Alice, is humming this song, and she's starting to remember because he's humming the song. And obviously we know it's the song he sings to her when he is in reality, but she knows it's important. She just doesn't know why. It causes her to remember being dragged in a different world, and maybe she's starting to remember that unknown couple is her and him, and that unknown person that was dragged is her. Ignore the onboarding where Jack gets basically told what the victory product is, because that's not useful. And then she remembers everything, and she confronts Jack about it, and Jack chips her down, so he has to say, okay, you're right, but now let's try to fix this. Blah, blah, blah. She deletes Jack, totally into that. He's really the villain of the story, honestly. It's what should have happened in the movie Passengers, where Chris Pratt basically kidnapped and sentenced to death Jennifer Lawrence's character. This is happening here. And so what didn't happen in Passengers, which is so unsatisfying, which was the proper comeuppance, is happening here. She gets to actually square off with her villain, which happens to be her husband, who has been gaslighting her this whole time, into it. Bunny finds her. Bunny reveals that she's known all along and that she's part of it, and she is the last sort of info dump that we need, which is, again, a dirty word, but Bunny knows the last essential thing is, now that you've done this, you have to get out, otherwise there will be consequences. So it really is, this is the end. This is the now capable of change. Bunny sees that, now it's time to change. This is all the now capable of change stuff with the change at the bottom. Dr. Collins has to intervene. Again, I'm not super stoked about the fact that Dr. Collins and Frank are basically not participating in the finale, although Dr. Collins does crash in the car, where Frank just kind of gets his thing by his wife. Alice is outside. The men start freaking out. Yes, there's consequences because things are changing. Ignoring the montage because that was basically just a really on-the-nose memory of what she thinks she has to do, where I would argue Bunny just should have to tell her she has to go. She has to go to this place. It's the portal. Go do it. The time for innuendo and not talking about things is over. Anyway, the men in red take the cars, the big car chase. I'm into that. Again, it's a pretty silly car chase. No big deal. Frank gets his comeuppance and gets deleted by his wife. Sure. Kind of easy. And I wish there was one more thing for Shelley to learn before it happened, but for the sake of Frank being sort of a lesser bad guy in this whole thing, her husband, Jack, being Alice's real bad guy, Frank getting his comeuppance in that moment, that's okay with me. Alice driving, crashes out of the car, has to walk the rest of the way, getting chased, gets to the building, has one last look of what her life used to be, which is this fake life, and then she leaves, and then you get the abstract images, which we know, and I think honestly it works as the end, as the onboarding the way it was. That's the onboarding, and then that's the end. She wakes up, it's over black, and if we really needed to, we could do a post-credits of Alice in the world that we exist in, where she's a surgeon, and her husband is kind of just a jerk and a loser, and has long hair and is ugly. Yeah, I'm okay with those as post-credits. I think we did it. There was very little to move around. Super credit to Olivia WIlde and Katie Silberman, right? Is that her name? I always forget. Katie Silberman. Huge credit. The plot is there. The story is there. It's just that something in the edit, it seems like they were focused on the wrong thing. They were focused on the plot, which is exciting because if it's a high concept like this, the plot is important. But the big thing is, and it really is this, story is character. Story is people. Story is the emotional experience of characters going through something where you can imagine yourself going through it, even if you haven't done it before yourself, and you're experiencing it as they're experiencing it. In this case, there's a really good inroads there because Florence Pugh's character is chaotic. She's confused. She's got memory lapses, and she doesn't trust anyone because people keep lying to her. I think that's a very common, that's a very approachable, that's a very well understood experience for a lot of people. Unfortunately, the sort of the panache, the fanciness, the window dressing of this movie took precedent over Alice, Florence Pugh's character's journey to uncover this investigation, uncover this mystery for herself. Because it became her mystery once Margaret self-deleted and Margaret was no longer part of the story. Because up until that point, Alice, in the zone of comfort, was just doing her own thing. Margaret was the one that pushed her out of it. Bunny was the one pushing her back into it. Yeah, honestly, how long have I been talking? An embarrassing amount of time. All right, well, that's what it is. I would have recut this movie and shaved off about 15 to 20 minutes in the middle, not really in the end, kind of in the end, now that I'm looking at it. There does seem to be a few things that I crossed out at the end, but if you look on the far left, the nice list, those are things we already had. Routines. The routine thing is great. It's such a good hallmark. It's such a good way to work. I like the routines. Unknown couple, flashback, plus humming the tune. I think those need to be better connected because that is what is going to knock her out of this, bring her to her reality. It's going to be the linchpin for her to realize the difference between fake and real. Because that's the whole problem, is she's being gaslighted through this whole movie. And she doesn't know what's fake, she doesn't know what's real, and unfortunately, every time she gets evidence that is in either direction, everybody and their mother decides to come in and undermine her and tell her she's crazy. Which again, is the experience of being gaslit, but it's not satisfying. And the problem with being gaslit in real life is you don't get that catharsis, you don't get that moment of, oh my god, I get it. In the movie, we need it. This is the lesson of this movie, in my opinion, is sticking it to the gaslighters. That's what this movie really is about as its theme. It's at the end of the day, if you have what it takes, in the case of Florence Pugh's character, Alice, you can get to the bottom of it even while being gaslit. And unfortunately, it requires the emotional journey that we don't have. So let me look at what else is on here. Black and white ballet. remains very confusing to me, and it's part of the onboarding thing, so I could take it or leave it. The fact that there's black and white ballet, and there's actually them doing ballet, they're too similar, and the fact that they're not the same thing I think is a problem, so I probably would have changed that, because it's just too confusing. So maybe I would actually delete the black and white ballet too. But this movie really is about Alice's investigation, and so what's happening, what are the men doing, and most importantly, why am I experiencing these memories that aren't mine? That's the whole thing. And so over the course of the journey, she's going to emotionally make choices that is going to advance the plot, not the other way around. Plot is fun, plot is exciting, plot is what if, but at the end of the day, story is character, story is experiencing it, story is empathizing with the character's plight, because we didn't go to see what could happen, we're going to see what happened. That's why you go to the movies. You don't go to see, oh my God, what if there was a Death Star? You go, oh my God, what happens if I'm Luke Skywalker and I have to destroy the Death Star? Two different things. Impassioned, very inaccurate way of explaining things, but that's where I'm standing with that. It's live anyway. Anything else before I go? I think obviously the drama behind this production undermined what could have been a little bit more attention positively to watching this, but the tepid response of the critics and the audience is a result of a messy movie, and you know, what I would argue I fixed the edit, or at least I got the edit going in the right direction in a couple of hours, but I had distance from it. I was not part of it, so I don't know how the directing went. I don't know how the edit went. I don't know if Olivia was in the edit. She should have been, obviously, because she's the director. But whoever edited this, or whoever had final say on how this was edited, I feel like they were just tracking plot when they should have been tracking character and emotionality, and instead it was messy and thin, and with just, again, what, like 15 to 25% adjustments of stuff they basically already had. I'm not even calling for things changed. I think they could have had a very satisfying, very complete, very correct to what he was trying to accomplish story, because at the end of the day, this is one of those stories where you want Alice, the main character, to win. You want her to defeat the tyranny of what's going on, and the way it happened in the story is just muddled and confusing, and it seems empty. So that's the live stream. Thank you to, I assume 0, but we'll check. 2 people. 1, it's me. It's my computer. Thank you to me for watching the live stream, but yeah, maybe I'll keep doing this. It took a while to set up, but I like it. And you know, again, this isn't rocket science. This is the whole thing, the whole chart. I have the chart already. This is a visual representation of how you could do a movie, and anybody can do this, and it's not hard. I have experience, and so that helps. But short of that, you know, I'm very much of the belief that if you watch Western movies, if you speak English and you've been watching movies in English, you sort of understand the basic template that is a Western movie. There's other ways to do movies. I'm not saying you can't do other ways, but in this case, this is a Hollywood movie. This is a Western style movie. And so if you want to actually take the time to write down the scenes and see what's working, see what's not working, yeah, absolutely. Why not? I feel like everybody should. I feel like if you're an audience member and you're not satisfied, there's something there to say, hey, you can say you didn't like it or it wasn't for you, but you can also say, if they, it's like a right as an audience member to say, if it's not working, what would make it work for me? Because at the end of the day, you want the movie to work. That's the whole thing. It's easy to kick a movie when it's down, but I think the average person, if they're watching movies, they know how to do this, even if they don't have the language, even if they don't have the experience. There's an inherentness to it. Yeah, so it makes me sad when a movie falls on its face. And this was an interesting case because it was a very interesting movie with a very interesting premise. Honestly, it's a Black Mirror episode, straight up. And I think at 60 minutes, it probably would have been a very tight Black Mirror episode. But because it was a movie, and because that's how it was conceived, because that's how Olivia Wilde basically sold it, it became a movie. And with some adjustments, not even a lot, an afternoon in a dude's apartment, or a woman's apartment, let's be honest. No dude should be interfering with this movie. Let's be real about that. You can have a very satisfying story, and they got so close. So, yeah. See you next time.